Well, it's been quite the weekend for South Melbourne fans. And of course, on top of it all, our lads are through to the round of 32 after last night's very. Now, I know what you're thinking. Mate, it's not Wednesday, it's Thursday. And you're right. But of course, as I'm certain you've all been aware, last night we were scheduled to have a cup game away down at Casey Comets at Southern United's new ground, which certainly has all the bells and whistles needed for a strong WNPL side. However, because of complications, the game was unable to kick off that evening, which I'm sure many of you would have heard of by now, particularly those who were present. And of course, many still remain in the dark. Now, of course, we aren't privileged to all information, but we do know a bit, and we know enough to give at least semi-definitive narrative about what happened. So, of course, as this is a health warning, if that's even the right terminology, we don't know. Our media team last night didn't really know because it is something that is, in a way, still quite specialist because we're not all used to this. Perhaps because we've had limited numbers throughout the country, so on and so forth. It just isn't the full, in-depth analytical plans that perhaps this could have required, because it's a very delicate diplomatic situation. You just cannot afford to say the wrong things. And so because of that, I'll first of all refer to a tweet from Football Victoria themselves, which stated late last night about, it was published about when the second half was supposed to kick off. A bit later though. It says, quote, following the notification that a player has been connected to a COVID exposure site, tonight's Nike FC Cup match between Casey Comets and South Melbourne has been abandoned. The health and safety of our community is paramount and the match will be rescheduled for a later date. Now, of course, the language there is a bit more blunt, more obvious, and while there was perhaps questions around whether we were going to use the word abandoned in our original messages that published, have now seemed to have been taken down, perhaps due to Federation mandate. Just don't know. At least from our perspective, we just don't know because it's something that is a constantly developing story. Now, what we have been led to believe after last night was one of our players, who is a student of Bacchus Marsh School that has been put in question. Due to that, the entire school has been made a certain tier level. However, the connection in question to bring it to the school, which was apparently a teacher, was there present or has been reported as a non-student day. Therefore, the students themselves were not present during the exposure. At least that is as far as we know. So, because of that, that player then entered training rounds and therefore change rooms, and because of indoor regulations, that is now been listed as a minor exposure site. Tease it can be a bit of a mess to wrap heads around, because everyone else wasn't there present. But basically, what it comes down to, what we have been led to believe, is that following Federation advice, it was advised that perhaps we shouldn't play the game, but apparently all parties were happy to proceed until it got to the game's kick-off, where apparently Casey then elected not to play, unless the decision to play or what to play was made prior to the match and therefore later than it was led to believe in our heads. It's not entirely clear, but what we do know is due to these health concerns, the fixture did not commence last night and is therefore to be rescheduled as the Federation announced late last night. Right. Now that's been cleared up, ideally. Let's look back to last weekend's fixture against Alamein. Now, this was a match where not too much of overall note. It wasn't the most special of fixtures in the broad scheme of things, as it was very much a highly standard affair. But nonetheless, I'm sure as you would have seen the score by now, being a 5-0 win, it makes it seem perhaps there was a bit more to it than maybe there was. Let's look back on things. At least for the first half, things seemed relatively alright. South was very aggressive in terms of attacking. There was constant balls getting the team up. So yes, there was certainly a sizable amount of pressure. Beyond that, in those particulars, there isn't too much to say the matter. Beyond that, of course, Ayres was looking dangerous, as she often is. You think you had to read your own handwriting? Those balls up the wing, those that made the greatest impression, particularly Amy Medwin, who, like, she was continuing her fine run of form, particularly in positional means. Beyond that, not too much note from the first half, aside from perhaps ball getting shed around a bit, with both Johnson and Pickett making points to adjust to the match. At least that was going more into the second half, so I'm getting ahead of myself only slightly. And perhaps that's because first half there isn't too much that could be said, because it was very much a very standard affair. And so distinction-wise, not more to be said. At least for the second half, one thing that did stick out was the role Barbieri has taken up in being very much the educator as the most experienced player on the field. She understands the game, she knows the game at a very deep level. So yes, Barbieri playing the educational role, which is something that is typically very, very prominent, but perhaps something that was more prominent during the Alamein game, as there was far more commands saying, alright, I need you to go from here to here, or you should be going to there, so that way you have to put pressure on them, so on and so forth. Very much trying to build the play more so on a level that goalkeepers perhaps normally don't show, and that's they are not just instructing, but teaching through their instruction as well. Something that is fantastic to see, particularly for players who perhaps maybe not as experienced, perhaps don't have instincts to the extent that she does. Going on, we had a very shaky crossbar attempt, shame that wasn't refunded. Beyond that, during standard substitutions to be expected, Pickett for Goff, very typical. Marshall for Chill, less typical, but very, very standard considering positional adaptation. They often take much the same role. And beyond that, there is one final point that should be made. And that is the senior debut of Evie Bauer, taking up the number 1 position as Barbieri has yet again been substituted mid-match, about the last 10-15 to help get other players some more senior minutes. Now, it's not typically something you see during a match, keeper being substituted. The way that this has been implemented by Young, and that's it's very unlikely anything's going to happen at this stage. You might as well sub the keeper and get the reserve keeper for the game to get some extra minutes up. And this has been implemented very, very successfully so far. All our substitute keepers yet to continue the goal, bar or not. So that's certainly something of note, at least strong for their own personal endeavours. And of course, it's always fantastic to see younger players get those minutes, their debuts, and continue to develop as players, both for club and community level. Otherwise, beyond that, that is very much the weekend's wrap. And so let's look to elsewhere around the grounds. First of all, Calder hosted Box Hill up at Keilor, where they went on to be 3-0 winners over Box Hill. We, of course, were hosted by Alamein at Knox, winning 5-0. Heidelberg hosted Bulleen, and again, Heidelberg suffered a quite substantial defeat, losing 7-0 this time at the Olympic Village. And finally, for last weekend, FE Emerging hosted Bayside, also at Knox, which Emerging went on to win 2-0. And so, we'll look towards the table and see how this has changed developments. Up top, on 30 points, remain your all beloved South Melbourne. In second, we have Bulleen on 25 points. Third, St Calder United on 22. Close behind, we have FE Emerging, also on 22 points, with 4 goals being the difference. In fifth place, we have Heidelberg United on 13. In sixth, we have Alamein on 12 points. Box Hill in seventh place on 4 points, with resultless Bayside remaining on their solitary donuts. And so, let's check out our fixtures for the weekend ahead and see what we should be expecting for this round 15 clash, which of course, technically and normally, would be the beginning of the third trimester of our 21 fixture season. And so, of course, Calder United are hosting Alamein, this time at Keilor Park. Bayside are hosting Box Hill. Heidelberg are hosting Emerging. And South Melbourne will be hosting Bulleen. All of these fixtures are on this Saturday with varied kick-off times. Calder kicking off at 3, Bayside and Heidelberg at 15:15, as well as ourselves kicking off at 50:30. So of course, a number of key fixtures to look forward to. Of particular note, perhaps, would be the Heidelberg versus Emerging fixture, where Heidelberg is still perhaps in contention for finals, but they do need to turn their act around and start getting a few wins to close the gap. Whereas ourselves, while it's not a like-for-like match, at least on points at this stage, it is still first v second with 5 points between us. Of course, winning for Bulleen does mean that makes their job a little bit easier in trying to steal the title away from their ever-essence efforts. But that is to be seen. In the meantime, stay safe, stay alert, and if there is to be any other further updates regarding this whole health warning saga, we will of course hear it first, either through South Melbourne channels or Football Victoria channels, so make sure stay tuned for both. Otherwise, as far as we're concerned, as spectators with no real direct contact, we are fine. It's just be prepared for any situations that may emerge, which we don't want to jinx it. If any of you are on the ball with when things seem to line up, fingers crossed. Hopefully we will send you all this coming Saturday at home. Till then, come on, Hellas.
Melbourne will enter a snap lockdown from midnight as Sydney's COVID cluster continues to wreak havoc interstate.